All right, if you would, let's open to Genesis chapter 23. Genesis, and we're now at chapter 23 in our series. And now we reach the death of Sarah. Spoiler alert, it tells you that in the caption. But the death of Sarah in chapter 23. And we'll start going through this. Not a terrible amount of time do we have to take in chapter 23, but there are some valuable things here. So the first thing we want to understand tonight is that Abraham demanded a justice of himself. And this justice meant that he demanded of himself. It meant that he should be treated just as everybody else. Now, when we get to our New Testament, and first in the book of Matthew, we see that Jesus states this principle more brilliantly when he says to do to others what you would also want done unto you. And so other people have worded that different ways, but the fact is the emphasis is on what we do. But we're going to look at a situation today where we would expect where this thing happened and someone would expect some type of mercy and special treatment. But the first thing we look at tonight is Abraham had a justice that he demanded of himself, that he should be treated just as everybody else. He should be treated fair. The word justice, the same as righteousness. Do we aspire to follow that example and behave the same way? Well, let's start looking there at verse 1. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up and from before his dead, and said to the Hittites, I am a sojourner and foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord, you are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land, and he said to them, If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat for me Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place. So we'll sum it up. He wanted to pay the full price for his field to bury his dead wife Sarah in. But he wanted to pay the full price for it. But now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, Of all who went in at the gate of his city, no, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. How many times they say, I give, I give, I give. He says, bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, But if you will, hear me. I give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, My lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. Now, if you measure that in today's currency of silver, it's a little over $3,000. And we know that Abraham was a very wealthy man. Maybe back then it was worth a little more. But even then, to wealthy people, it's like, it's $3,000. You want the price of the field, it's only that much. Nowadays, our cars would be worth more than that. But anyways, so he says, what is that to me? It's only 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. And Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So Abraham demanded of himself a justice, that he would be treated just as everybody else. And this is during a time of mourning. Now, a lot of times there's reasons where we would say, no, I need to receive some mercy in this situation, or I need to be given the benefit of the doubt, or I need to, because of this, I should be excused or justified because of such and such case. But Abraham is mourning the loss of his dead wife, Sarah, who, by everything we've read, is very close to him, and he doesn't demand that. He has a character that says, no, I want to pay the full price. Everyone else would pay the full price for the field, and that's what I want to do. And Ephron eventually wins him over because he says, it's just 3,000. Basically, we would say it's only 4,000 in today's currency as far as what the worth of silver is. But he's saying this field, it's nothing to any of us, so just take it. But the point is, the price really doesn't matter. Abraham wanted to demand of himself to do the right thing and be treated and to pay that price for the field. And so that is no doubt the point of the text. You see how many times he's saying, I give it to you. And he says, no, listen to me. And the Hittites say, no, listen to us. And Ephron says, listen to me. And then Abraham says, no, listen to me. So there's this back and forth going on. And God wants us to know, even mourning, Abraham wanted to pay the actual fair price. So let's think of some examples of this. Now, we chose some simple examples, some very, I'll say minuscule examples to get the point across, because we don't have to think deeply on this. It just paints the picture. You stop at a four-way stop sign. Now, everyone takes their turn, right? Well, we instantly smile. We know that's not the case. People sometimes like, is it really a big deal? We basically stopped at the same time. You'll just go, and then I'll go, and then we'll move along at the same time. But we've stopped at those four-way stop signs, and we know that's not how it goes down, and it gets messy, and we would say for no reason. But do we demand that of ourselves? What if the other person didn't see? Maybe a big truck goes by, and you say, oh, I know that person made it there first, but I can go. And I was here, I got things to do. It's their fault for, the big truck passed. I have no control of that, so I'm just going to go because I have the time. But Abraham demanded a justice of himself in all things. And we can follow that example. What about the speed limit or traffic laws? I used to justify that and I know this kind of, a lot of people of this topic, they might say, I feel this way, or I feel differently, or this and that. But isn't that the point of what we're discussing? Justice for all people, right? And what is right according to the letter of the law. Now, I used to say in justifying, everyone goes 75, and no one and that's true in California, it's also true in Colorado, no one goes 65, right? Everyone goes 10 over. And, when I started thinking about the submission to the authority of those in power when I came back from school, it's something no one does not struggle with it to some degree. And I don't like using oxymorons, but the fact is the situation with traffic can change from day to day. But I make the point because I said, okay, is it the speed limit per the law, or is it the speed limit enforced? Because I know CHP officers who would say, no, we're not go 70. We're not going to worry about someone going 5 miles over. We're looking for the people who are driving recklessly and going, far over the speed limit. And so we don't see that as, against authority. Well, that's the speed limit enforced. But the law of the land, what is it? Well, it's what's enforced, but it's also, what is it? The written laws that we're under. It's the United States Constitution. And I know there's some debate, well, I just have to listen to the Constitution. I believe what we see in that section of Romans is that we're submissive to the authority that is being enforced, but we're also submissive to the government itself, right? And so when I had to renew my license and everything, and I went over the test again, the law was very clear that you have to go, the sign that's posted on that sign, it says that you shall not exceed, and under dangerous conditions, that you might have to decrease that speed. So we don't like it. It seems like it's too slow half the time. We could say, oh, but no one would get anywhere. Everyone else is going faster. If you go too slow, everyone's going to get angry at you. But when you look at that sign that there's no getting around, that was legislated by the United States government, and we live there. Well, that's just another example. What about when someone gets angry or has a bad day? Someone says, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Of course I was going to react like that. Of course, I'm only human. Of course I was going to get impatient. But true justice and righteousness of God, the kind that Abraham demands of himself, is no, there's no excuse. You can get mad, you could have a bad day, but that does not give you right. You have to demand justice of yourself at all times. Now, are we going to fall short of that? Absolutely. But we have to strive for that righteousness. God is a loving God, and God is a gracious God, and He gives to us. But we sometimes we focus on those two things, and rightfully so. But He's a righteous God, and He is a righteous God just as He is a gracious and a loving God. So we can't say He's loving and He's gracious, and so He's more of those things than righteous. No, the very fact that we have God's love and we need His grace is because of the fact that He's righteous. We have grace because He's righteous. We do unrighteous things, and we need His grace to cover that. And so we have to demand this justice of ourselves, just like Abraham did. Now, what about one has had a hard life and they're in a difficult situation? Well, that may be true. And think about all the people who have had, difficult situations in the Bible, but that never excused what is right versus what's wrong. You see, God never justified that. And you can't find an instance in the Bible where He said, He might understand the person's situation. He may understand what is going on. He has compassion for it. But He never said, because of what happened, they can do it. And I consider that right. They can get away with this. And that's right. God would never say that. To God, righteousness is demanded. He Himself cannot fathom doing the wrong thing because He hates unrighteousness. It's unrighteous because God commanded not to do it, but it's unrighteous because unrighteousness is against God's character. And so sin is sin because God calls it sin, but it's also true that God's character is not sinful. He hates sin. He hates evil. And so we have to understand this is who God is, and we want to be like Him and demand ourselves to be just and as righteous as best we can, just as He is. And we can't say, well, we're going to mess up anyways. We do that, we've already set the bar here, and we're setting ourselves up to fail and sin. We have to put it up to God and know that we are going to fall short, but that is our goal. We want to be as our Heavenly Father. We want to be like Jesus, and so we have to aim for that and demand that of ourselves like Abraham is, knowing that we have grace, knowing that we have God's love, but we want to demand ourselves to be like God the best we can. In light of this whole idea of someone in a difficult situation, let's go real quickly over to Titus and look at Titus chapter 3. A lot of times Titus is a little hidden in there, and so he kind of gets put on the back burner, but he is inspired just like Timothy is. So sometimes we don't want to give Timothy more attention than Titus. But Titus chapter 3, and look there at verse 8. And he says, the saying is trustworthy, and I want you to insist on these things so that those who have believed in God may be careful to devote themselves to good works. What should a Christian be spending his time focused on? Good works. Okay, we know good works, they're not what save us, but that's not what Paul's discussing. He's saying, what should we be about? What should our business be about? And it should be about good works as Christians and as the church. That's what our focus should be. And these things are excellent and profitable for people. Well, that's why we should be about those good works and devote ourselves to them. Verse 9, but avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless. And so when it comes to the Word of God, he's not saying ignore what God has commanded. He's talking about those quarrels, those dissensions, those things that divide, and they really don't have anything to do with God's will for our lives. They're just things that people like to argue about. And some people devote themselves to those things. Well, Paul said, make sure the Christian is devoted to good works and not devote yourself to those things, because those things are just a waste of time. But people are descending, they're dividing over those things. And so we've talked about in John how Jesus had no problem causing a division when it came to the truth. But things like genealogies, things like, they're just opinions. They're not actually commandments of God. And they're not actually things that God said, you must worship this way and do things this way. It's not about those things. People just want to cause dissensions and argue about them. Well, what does he say? He says that they are unprofitable and worthless. In verse 10, as for a person who stirs up division, so they don't want to devote themselves to good works. The church may have good works going on. They may have evangelism going on, good things going on. They may be doing things for the Christians to grow, doing things to try and get people in the world to come to Christ. And they're about these good works. But then you have these people who aren't concerned with that, and they would rather, while those things are going on and they could be engaged in those things, they would rather cause division and dissension and cause problems and raise these arguments and all. And what does he say to do? He says, as for a person who stirs up division after warning him once and then twice, have nothing more to do with him, knowing that such a person is warped and sinful, he is self-condemned. Now, that is in the context of gentleness. That is in the context that you have already dealt with them in love. You've already tried to be gentle. You've already tried to reason and say, brother, sister, this is what God has said and this is why. And this is how these things are going to work. And I'm not picking on you and I'm not doing these things to attack you. I'm doing it out of love. When we go back to Titus chapter 1, he had already talked about when someone is rebuked. In verse 13, Titus 1 verse 13 says, this testimony is true. Therefore rebuke them sharply. But what's the reason? That they may be sound in the faith, not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth. So they're getting in those genealogies, their myths, and they're causing divisions. But he says rebuke them sharply. Why? Because they've already been dealt with gently. They've already been someone has tried to explain to them that it's because we don't want sin to be in the church. We don't want these things to spread. We don't want quarrels and we don't want these problems. We want to get along to the same purpose, to bring people to Christ and to do good works for Christians and to grow. And evidently that did not work with them. And now they have to be sharply rebuked because there's nothing else to do. We've already tried to talk about the word, but it didn't work. And we've tried to go to someone else, but that didn't work either. And the only thing left to do, rebuke them sharply and let them know we cannot tolerate this sort of thing. Because if we don't, then the only other route it's going to go is it will be tolerated. And then what will it grow into? And so the point we go to here, though, is that the purpose is for the brother. The purpose is not, we don't want those dissensions. But the reason why Paul said to do that in verse 13, he said that they may be sound in the faith. It's because we love that person. We want them to be sound in the faith. We don't want them to keep going down that road. We want their soul to be in heaven. And so we can't let them continue on that way. And so that's the purpose why we do it. But the fact is that we have to be about these good works. And when we're not, we take care of it. But the point is, don't we know people who have had a hard life? And some of those people might be those ones in the church. And the situation is difficult and it's not easy. And that's why we start with gentleness and love and reasoning and trying to get to know, the person and what's going on and how can we handle it patiently. But the fact is, a hard life in a difficult situation cannot excuse unrighteousness. And God says to deal with it. And so the whole point of this is not that just that one thing, but we think of all these examples, and the point is that Abraham demanded, my wife just died. I'm mourning over my wife. But that doesn't give me a reason to take advantage of the land. I want to pay the full price. Now we would look at that situation and say, Abraham, are you crazy? Everyone understands your mourning. Everyone understands that your wife has died and that you've been a good man in the land and you've been good and righteous. And the Canaanites see that. And so you don't have to be this way, but it's just his nature that he's demanded of himself. I'm going to be just. I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be treated and treat myself like everyone else is treated. And everyone else would have to pay the price for that field. And Abraham knows that he's been blessed by God and he's wealthy, so he wants to pay that price. And it doesn't matter how much it is, but do we have that same type of character that we can have a difficult situation? We can be angry from a bad day. Someone could have done us wrong, but we can't do wrong and go about things the wrong way just because something may have happened to us, just because something difficult may have fallen on us. We have to demand ourselves, I want to be angry, I want to get frustrated. There's so many things I want to do, but I have to demand myself that I'm just and righteous like God. Am I always going to do it? No. But I need to try my best to demand that of myself. Now, another thing we could look at is Bible teaching for everyone's needs and maturity level. Now, why do we bring this up? Because we all have different spiritual needs. We all are at different maturity levels. And we're going to need different Bible teaching depending on what we need to hear. You might have somebody who is 1 year in the faith, 2 years in the faith. You'll have someone else who's 5 years in the faith, and maybe another person 30, 40 years in the faith. Then we get to the physical age. You'll have someone who's 13, 14 years old. You'll have someone who's 90 years old. You'll have someone who's 50 years old, and they're all going through different things. You'll have different types of work that someone's involved in. It's going to require different challenges. And so we have to understand when we're in the church and when we want to be just in everything, that's true in the world. We demand that of ourselves in the world, but it's also true in the church because we're here when we're not in the world, right? We're here gathered together. And so we have to understand, I might need this thing and this other person might need this other thing. And there's only so much Bible teaching. And I got to understand that sometimes this brother needs this type of lesson and this type of teaching. Sometimes the attention of the shepherds and the attention of those who are spiritually mature is going to have to go to some of these people. And maybe I need this kind of style, but I need to understand there's other people in the body and they have a different need. They have a different maturity level. Maybe one needs milk and another needs meat, but we have to take that into consideration. So not only in the world, we have to be fair and righteous in the church. Well, the second thing we learned from this section, our second point today, is that here in Genesis chapter 23, is that Abraham lived in a favorable way among the inhabitants of Canaan. This is our second takeaway from this chapter. And we could go and read the verse, but we already read those verses, and so we already see it in this case. And the inhabitants of Canaan were favorable with him. And this means that he himself lived in a favorable way with them. And so we can think about this in several examples. You saw how, normally that wouldn't be the case under normal circumstances, but they wanted to give him the field. And it's like they're begging him, Abraham, just take the field. Your wife Sarah died, just take the field. You don't have to pay for it. But he's demanding that justice and the righteousness of himself. But you see, why are they that way with him? Because he's lived in a favorable way among them. One of the qualifications of elders and deacons is to have favor. And that doesn't mean, there's going to be people who just hate us because we're Christians or have something against Christianity. But by and large, the character of Christ produces good character in people, and that is going to be likable. Now, it doesn't mean the message will always be likable, but we notice it at our jobs. We notice it with when people notice our responsibilities, and the teachings of Christ produce good character, and people like that. And it's going to make us live in a favorable way. And he lived in that way. And so we can think of some examples of this. It's like someone who is picky or pushy as a guest in someone else's house. You ever had that? You invite someone over, and I'm not saying I necessarily have had this, but it's kind of like they start making decisions. Oh no, you need to do this. You need to do that. And it's not, it can be pride, but it's not necessarily that you're being prideful, like, oh, this is my house. It's just that you meant to invite them over. Maybe you needed like some help, or maybe you were just having them over as a guest, and then they start, criticizing things. Well, we bring it up because bringing someone in your home is kind of like a smaller level of bringing someone into your land. And Abraham has been brought into their land, and he's a good guest. We would say it that way. It's not his land, and he's a favorable guest. There's nothing they can say about him. They might say, his God, I don't know about him. We have different beliefs. We have our pagan gods. But when facts come to facts, they only have good things to say about Abraham. And so it's like being invited as a guest in the home. And we could look at this example, Luke chapter 10, verse 7, when Jesus sends the apostles out and he says, eat what they provide to you. Okay, why does he say that? He's telling the apostles that if they want to give you food, you have the right to take it. So don't feel guilty because you're being paid and what you're doing is preaching the gospel. You're doing the work, and don't feel guilty about it. But what does he do say? He says, eat, some version might say, what is set before you. And I'm a firm believer that if I'm invited in someone's house, I'm not going to complain. You give me top ramen, rice, I'm not going to complain. Someone may not, they work the whole week, they got things going on, and they're not going all out when they fix up a meal. But they're trying to be a good host. They're trying to provide something so that your stomach's not growling. And so, I'm not, whatever you cook. And that reminds me when I was younger, I didn't know all these, lessons when I was younger, but to some degree, I always felt that way. I would be invited to my friend his whole family was Mexican. And if you know anything about their culture, we go to these taco trucks and we have tacos, burritos, and all these things. But they have all kinds of traditional soups they have. If you've heard of menudo or pozole. And I never had that stuff before as a kid. But I ate it. I ate all of it because, one, they would talk and it would sound like they were fighting and arguing. And I was like, what's wrong? What'd you do to make your mom mad at you? And she said, oh, no, we were just talking. And it's just kind of a cultural difference. But I was like, I'm going to eat, what's set before me. But they were so used to it, sometimes they didn't like it, or they didn't eat all of it. So sometimes their mom would get a little irritated at them. But she told them once, I always like when he comes over because he eats all the soup and everything. And, he doesn't complain. So, but I'm a firm believer in that. And that's a good example because we can have these good manners and practices when we go to other people's homes. And so when we're visiting other people's land, like Abraham, he demands of himself, I'm going to be favorable among them. And it benefited him. He didn't do it for the benefit, right? But he did it because it was his character, and that was just, he reaped what he sowed. We could think of it, kind of, we've alluded to it, but one going to another land and breaking all their laws. And we've seen some of that lately, and it's been a discussion. But to be honest, it's not just here. We see it all over the world, and we understand that you can believe what you want. And I'm not, if you've heard other stuff, I don't really get political, but I'm using it as an example that we understand if we were traveling somewhere else, we get it. Hey, I don't want to get in trouble, or I don't want to cause them to not like me, so I'm going to abide by their laws. And so that's just another example. Another thing I thought of is, you ever seen someone who was rude to a fast food worker? Well, my first job out of high school, I worked at In-N-Out. And I perfectly understand sometimes the person there had a bad day. And they're the ones who are kind of being short with the person, or sometimes it is the person who has an attitude. But I also know sometimes that was a result because they had already dealt with a customer like that. And so if you're ever on the receiving end of that, it's like several years later, I said, I'm good with working at Amazon. I like the warehouse much better than food service because I was kind of scarred from that. In Amazon, you can listen, but you have liberty to, work as you like, as long as you're being responsible. And other warehouses I was at before that. So it paints the picture. Now, our third thing we walk away from this section about is that Abraham was treated favorably by the citizens of the land. Now, I've heard people say, foreigner in the Old Testament, sojourner. Let's relate that because that's kind of like an immigrant who comes over here. And, they're not, they make the case, you can't compare it to the Old Testament because here it's a legal versus illegal thing. But actually, that word foreigner and sojourner means it's not their land. It's not where they're living. They're from somewhere else. They don't belong there. They're allowed to stay there. They're passing through. And who allowed them to stay there? Well, whoever was governing the land. And they were allowed to be there. And so all I'm saying is you might have, a political view one way or the other. And again, the intention of this lesson is not to, push politics or even talk about it. The point is, regardless of what we believe or how we believe, can we treat people with kindness, regardless of how they may be treating us? Can we treat them in a way that they say, you know what, maybe I made some mistakes. There were some things I shouldn't have done. I didn't want to end up in this situation. Or maybe I knew a little bit what I was getting into, but I didn't feel I had much of a choice, so I did what I had to do. But maybe some of that was right and some of that was not right. But I met these people over there, and they may have known a lot about that, but they treated me good. And Abraham, he was treated good by the citizens of Canaan. Now, isn't that amazing? And, it's not till later that God sends the Israelites into the land to take a possession, and he gives them 400 years. And maybe there's a little bit of a reason for that, but still, you have these pagan people. We've seen some of what their cities have done, and they're treating Abraham good. Now, part of that is because of how Abraham was a foreigner and sojourning. But it's just an amazing passage of Scripture. The fact is, it's like going to someone's home if we flip it the other way, and they treat you as insignificant. We talked about you invite someone and they're kind of being ill-mannered towards you or trying to make decisions, but have you ever been to someone's home and you're just totally treated as significant? Did you want to go back? Well, I absolutely did not, and I know you probably didn't either. When I went to Spain and I realized this was the case with other countries, some of them, it wasn't like I expected, growing up here. And I know people do that too when they see a foreigner come here. I just wasn't expecting it when I went somewhere else. And it's like they wanted to show me the city and they, let me experience the good food that they have to offer and some of the culture and the things we could do. And it's like, this person's a stranger. I mean, they don't even know me. It was so bizarre for me that I'm not used to strangers being treated or treating you like a brother or like they know you. But a lot of countries, they still have that hospitality and it never went away. And the fact is, if we have these qualities that Abraham had and that he probably helped by the way he helped Canaan to have them, but we see how they treated him and God points that out, then we can make a big impact as Christians, as citizens in this world. I mean, our citizenship, what we're looking forward to is heaven. But while we're here, while we're sojourning, while we're traveling through, as far as how can you make a real life impact, you could do things as simple as this. And these are ways that, we don't go out, look, I'm giving. Look, I'm reading my Bible. I want everyone to see me, you know. But we do things and our light shines because of those things we do. We don't do it to be seen, but there's some real practical, applicable things that we can do. And people say, no, there's just something different about them. And either they had extremely good parents, like better than all the other parents I know, or something has changed their life. They're just different. They don't act like anyone else. But it's because Abraham demanded this sort of justice of himself. And if we demand it of ourselves, it'll be the same way. The last examples I talked about working in fast food of how you're treated sometimes. And it could just be someone had a bad day. But we can flip that too. You ever gone to a restaurant and we say didn't have good service? Not that we're expecting them to, shine our shoe and do all that. But you ever went to a place where it was just like nothing at all? Here's your food. They just there you go on the table, and you don't want to go back there because it's more than just you didn't do something for me or you didn't talk. It's like you didn't want me there, and so there's lots to think about in this chapter, and everything we can think about can make a practical and real life difference with the people we know. We have lots of spiritual things, but these are some real life citizen type things and ways we can be with people, and they're going to know something's different about them. And I would hazard a guess that they would recognize we're a Christian. And that might open up a discussion. We get to evangelism through trying to start a conversation, but we can also get to evangelism by our works. And we don't do those works to show off how good we are. We do those works because we demand such a justice of ourselves, because we want to be like God's character, that people will have no choice but to notice it. And so we'll end there. If you have a need tonight,